Can we talk for a minute about our Integrating Heart and Mind workshop?
Absolutely. I'm excited. It's coming up in the fall of 2024.
I'm so excited. We changed the format to make it more accessible to people with like work schedules and personal schedules. And so this time we're going to do it 3 hours on a Friday afternoon or evening, depending on where you're at, and 5 hours on Saturday for 2 different weeks in September.
Yeah, it's so great. Like if you're finding yourself stuck in like sticky bad patterns or having communication issues or something like that, or if you want to just like get closer and trust yourself or your partner more, this is the workshop for you.
Yeah, and individuals are welcome, couples are welcome. If you're interested in really thinking through how to serve yourself well inside of your relationships, then we've built a workshop that will support you in finding the ways that are just right for you.
To sign up, head over to our website at whydoesmypartner.com/events.
We hope you'll join us. Welcome to the Why Does My Partner podcast.
I'm Jules.
I'm Vicky.
And I'm Rebecca. We're your hosts. We're also couples therapists and messy humans bumbling through our own relationships every day.
We met at a training, and our secret sauce is that we and our partners became fast friends. Between us, we have more than 40 years of experience holding hard relational questions with our clients. We're going to bring those questions here.
And together, we're going to take a stab at answering those questions. This podcast is not a substitute for couples therapy. If something you hear in this podcast stirs something deep within you about your relationship, reach out to a couples therapist in your area.
We also love to hear your questions, so don't forget to go over to whydoesmypartner.com to leave a question of your own. Our next live workshop, Integrating Mind and Heart, will be held online from September 22nd to 24th, 2023.
If you want to get closer and trust each other and yourself to get through the hard moments, this is the workshop for you.
Sign up at whydoesmypartner.com/events.
Welcome back. I'm Jules.
I'm Vicky.
And I'm Rebecca. And here's today's question. Why does my partner use sex as a weapon? Whether it's withheld, or I'm told you failed, or I need somebody with a higher sex drive, or you can't keep up, or you're too sex obsessed, what is this all about?
Oh.
Yeah, like I wanted to jump in with, just your partner sucks, but then you kept reading the question and my heart broke. Like it's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think you're sex obsessed. I mean, maybe you are, I shouldn't say that, but that was.
Well, what does that even mean?
Right.
We live in this space that it's pretty taboo. I mean, things are changing for
And
sure.
they're not.
And they're also not.
They're going backwards.
Well, no,
And
actually,
sometimes they go backwards.
I think that's actually a really good point from both of you. I've never outed this to our audience before. So people who know me know this. Our audience who doesn't know me as well. I'm very, very religious. I don't bring it in the room if my clients don't want me to. But so I have that background as well. And I would say it really is both. Like things really are changing. And Becca, in some ways, they're really not. Like I think you both are 100% right on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, when I think about this question, I think, whether somebody says, why are you so sex obsessed? Or somebody says, why don't you want sex more? There's a similar root behind both those questions. It's basically like, why don't you want the same amount of sex I want? Why don't you want the same kind of sex I want? Why can't you match
Be more
me?
like me.
Be more like me.
Because if you were more like me, then I wouldn't have to think there might be anything wrong with me.
Well, if you were more like me, the world would be a better place. You guys know that I feel that way very openly.
I think that, but here's the rub in that, Vic. I think that every one of us and every one of our listeners thinks that way.
Yeah, I think I
There are parts of me that think that way. There are also parts of me that enjoy the variety.
Exactly. I was just going to say, because I know there are parts of both of you that don't. Like, there's no part of me that doesn't think that.
Okay.
put that out there.
I have both on board. I have
You
parts
do.
of me that absolutely wants you to want the same thing I want. There are also parts of me that it find play and space and mystery and allure in the distance between us.
Mhm.
And so if you were
Mhm.
actually, if you were for reals only wanting what I want, then actually I wouldn't be that interested and get bored after, the
Oh,
first 2 or 3 times. So the fact that you
interesting.
want something different than me helps me move into playfulness or helps me move into
Mhm.
exploration or helps me move into interest or
It
passion.
helps me move.
It helps me
Oh.
move.
Right?
Which in sex is important sometimes.
Little bit more than important, right? This is the thing. Like things get frozen in us. We get stuck,
Mhm.
especially in places where we're all the same, where we're like we don't.
Mhm.
What happens then is like we stop taking risks. We stop trying to figure
Mhm.
out like what would it be like if, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so like we're not in a place then of going like, I wonder if I did it differently and like, like if you scratched my elbow, like what would that feel like?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Right? Like would I enjoy like do I prefer the outside of my elbow or the inside of my elbow to be touched?
Inside every time.
Right, but like
I'm just
I'm
letting
gonna
you
have to
know
if
try that
I'm
something
next
not
time with
if
the
about
I'm
me.
elbow.
not
Now I'm
exploring and
curious.
you know what? I
Mhm.
like the inside a lot, but the
Mhm.
outside is also kind
Oh,
of
no, it wakes me.
cool.
No, I'm touching. No, don't like
I'm
it.
not.
No?
I'm really curious.
My whole
Okay,
body just
okay.
went squiggly.
What about your wrist?
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
about your wrist?
Oh, all the different parts are fine. See, I don't have
Okay.
any squiggles
Oh,
there.
see, I have on the inside of my wrist, my
Uh-huh.
body goes,
On the inside, it's more like that, and
yeah.
then but on the outside, it doesn't make me go, "Oh, no,"
Oh,
whereas
right.
on the elbow, it
Oh, on
does.
the elbow it
Your
does.
elbow
Uh-huh,
was like, "Oh,
uh-huh.
no." Like, I
"Oh,
watched your
no,
body.
don't
Didn't
touch me."
yeah.
Right, but so like each of our bodies is wired to pick up these sensations totally differently.
Mhm.
And if
Yeah, that's a
we
pain. Like,
well,
mm.
is it? It could also be like the coolest thing because when we're
You
talking
guys are
about
crazy.
sex, we're talking about sensuality and finding pleasure. And how do we find pleasure? It's based on what we feel.
Yes, and it would be a lot less complicated if everyone felt the same. If
Well,
I
and
know that it
here's the
feels
other
good on the
thing.
inside of my elbow, I touch Gabe on the inside of his elbow, and we're good to go. I won't touch I won't touch Jules's outside of her elbow because I
And
know she doesn't like it.
right?
And
And
I
that's
might
good
try to play
information.
with it because, I'm curious. Is it still like that today or does it change?
I do not consent for you to touch my elbow.
I'm not touching your elbow, but I'm
I'm
just
totally
saying.
touching your elbow when I see you again.
You can touch mine. That's
I
okay.
Oh, that's awesome.
I
So,
just
yes, I get here's the thing. I get that if it were actually the same, we could totally avoid talking about it, which would avoid the shame
Oh,
pit that we all get
yeah,
into when we
yeah,
start talking about it
there it
because I'm
is.
not supposed to talk about it.
Well, sort of, because if it was all the same and I kind of wanted something different, I might feel a whole lot of shame for talking about the thing
Yeah,
that I want
no, I
that's
that makes
totally
sense.
different.
Yeah, that makes
Right.
sense.
Right? So, like,
And
that's the
and
thing.
this
Yeah.
is why I think it feels weaponized.
Yeah.
Because when you think about shame, what is it
Mhm,
you could do with shame? You can either kind of swallow into it,
mhm,
or you could point
mhm,
it out.
mhm.
And when it starts
Oh,
when
yeah.
that energy, so it's contempt energy really. So when that energy gets pointed out, it feels like blame. So that's why I think
Yeah.
this question is landing as like, why is my partner turning sex into a weapon?
Well, because they're not turning it in towards themselves. They're not
Right. I
going
think
into shame. So it looks like
it looks
blame.
like blame instead. So I think that's
Yeah.
why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. And so it makes me really curious about your partner's relationship with sex
Mhm.
and your relationship with sex and how much internalized sexual shame one or both of you may be carrying.
Mhm.
So that's just normal,
I
right?
mean,
Like,
like,
Mhm.
I think I have this conversation with everyone though,
mhm,
because like we all have a story.
Mhm.
mhm,
We all have internalized messages,
mhm.
Mhm.
right? Do we know what they are?
Right. Yeah, I was literally
Right?
just
Like,
gonna
let's
say
just
that.
start there. And like,
Yeah,
do
that some of
I
us
know what
know, some
mine
of
is?
us
Do I know what my
don't.
partner's is?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it doesn't mean that there's anything right or wrong about either of our
Right.
stories, but like, let's
Right.
get to know ourselves.
Do we even know what that internal map looks
Right.
like?
And like, and then in knowing
Mhm.
that map, we start learning things like, oh, the outside of my elbow doesn't feel good, but the inside does. Or,
Mhm.
like Rebecca's gonna kind of try to play with you there, and you're gonna
Mhm.
be like, no, 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 it's a game of consent, right? Like, so we're learning these kinds
Yeah.
of things,
Yeah.
Right, totally.
But we're
right?
actually talking about it.
Because we're talking about it. If we don't have if we avoid the discomfort of it, we avoid the whole conversation. And now we're just like trapped in this place of not moving, not touching each other, feeling like you're mad at me, feeling like there's something wrong with me, right? Like
Yeah.
we're in this, ugh.
Mhm. And then we're avoiding the conversation rather than moving through the discord of the conversation. I'm not still in the mini series, am I?
We're not there, but we're there. We're always there.
Yeah,
Right?
it's
So
always gonna come up.
if I
Uh-huh.
avoid moving through that discord, then I avoid finding all of this out and maybe building more trust and building trust that we can handle conversations about sex.
Yeah. So
And by the way, if you are the one who is using sex questions in a blamey way, why are you sex obsessed? Why did you fail at sex? Why didn't it's
you
your
had too many
fault?
partners, you didn't have enough
Your
partners.
partner.
There's something
Mhm.
weird about the way you do
Totally.
that.
Yeah, all
No.
of that. If that's you, then this is an invitation to make a little U-turn and be really curious about, okay, what is the hope
Mhm.
behind that question? And is there any, maybe even super subtle avoidance of pain or grief or shame that you're doing and putting onto your partner instead of talking in a more vulnerable way, which is maybe I'm really scared to talk to you about sex, or I don't feel like these conversations go well, or I want to tell you about something I want, but I'm really scared to.
Or I don't know anything about this and it
Mhm.
kind of freaks me out and I think there's something wrong with me. Can we learn
Mhm.
about it together? Or do you actually know anything about this? Or if
Mhm.
you know something about this, what does that mean that I don't know something about this?
Mhm.
Right. Like, so
Mhm.
all of that
Wow.
stuff is the stuff that's getting conjured up in here. There's
Right.
so much vulnerability. And so I think another U turn for both partners to make in here
Mhm. Mhm.
is what if instead of only looking at where things feel blamey or shamey, where things feel
Mhm.
hard, right?
Mhm.
Instead of looking at what we feel like might be the matter with us or our partner, what if we look the other direction,
Mm.
right? So, where would that have us looking? It would have us looking for what feels good to me, what feels good to you,
Mhm.
right? So now we're starting to talk about pleasure, which is a
Mhm.
whole new orientation. And it's not at all the orientation that we're taught inside of our culture. Our culture orients us towards shame when we're
Mhm.
talking about sex. Like, how many conversations have you heard? How many sex ed programs do you know about? How many places is sex ed even banned, right? Like, why is it banned? Because of this culture of shame.
Mhm.
So, if we start reorienting this conversation to a culture of pleasure, what
Ooh.
changes?
Yeah, and I'm just noticing, in my own psychological floor, what happened in my body, Becca, when you said that. Let's
Mhm.
orient to a culture of pleasure, and the top of my brain, by the way, 100% agrees with you.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
and
Bring it.
what I noticed happening was this teeny tiny flary sort of feeling in the center of my chest that then dropped down and like
Mhm.
turned almost into like black sludgy sort of feeling. It was super subtle, but it was
Mm.
right there the second you said that. It's like, oh, that tells me something about my psychological floor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
my psychological floor knows it has associations. It creates meaning, right? It organizes all the information that I've ever been through in my life into meaning categories. And so like connection might mean for one person safety and trust, and connection for another person might mean always invasion, or connection for another person might mean violence is the only way you get it, or there's lots of different
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
there could be an infinite list. Your psychological floor is unique as a fingerprint. So, um, w- when I noticed that, I noticed, oh, ple- seeking pleasure in sex somehow is tagged for me with a little like hot shame feeling. It was
Mhm.
a super subtle, but oh, gotcha. I just learned something about my psychological floor that I still hold, even though I've done
Mhm.
tons and tons of work with this, and I educate people on sex, and I read constantly about this stuff, and
And
I'm
you just learned something new.
and I still just learned something like, "Oh, wow, yeah, that pleasure word, even though I've explored it in lots of different ways, when we're just talking about it now, no, you're not allowed to have that, that's bad for you, like, there's something wrong with you or
Oh.
bad in you for wanting
Oh,
that
for
space."
wanting that, for wanting
For
pleasure.
wanting pleasure in a sexual space. Pleasure seeking in food is fine,
Mhm.
but in
Ah.
sex is not fine. So let's notice that, like, oh, there, even as you're listening, and maybe you even stop the episode or listen through to the end and then replay it, but mark
Mhm.
your body while you're listening,
Mhm.
is when we're laughing or throwing some of these words out, you might even begin to build
Mhm.
a sexual map,
You're starting to build a
Mhm.
template,
right?
right? I this is what I love about this, and I
Mhm,
could probably go on and talk about this for,
mhm,
like,
mhm,
hours
mhm,
and hours.
mhm,
I
mhm,
have, in fact, with my friend Cindy. Cindy
mhm,
Darnell is, a wonderful, sex educator, sex therapist,
mhm,
teacher of this stuff. She's just recently written a book called Sex When You Don't Feel Like It. And she has a wonderful blog post on 5 ways to increase your pleasure tonight that
mhm,
we'll link in the show notes
Mhm.
to this episode.
mhm, mhm,
There's so much more to learn, as Jules is beautifully illustrating for us. No matter
mhm,
how long we've been inside
Yeah.
this work,
mhm.
we're
There's always
still
more. Yeah.
learning. The learning keeps unfolding. The more you get to know yourself, the more you discover
Mhm.
what brings you pleasure, what brings your partner pleasure, the
Mhm,
more you learn.
If you
mhm,
allow it to, I found myself thinking, like, if you're
Ah,
willing to keep learning and growing, then the possibilities are always gonna be there
they
mhm,
are.
if you're
They are.
willing,
And
and Jules
with
is
that
willing.
willingness and with those
Mhm.
possibilities, it's kind of like, I don't know, I see it as like the antidote to feeling like, why is my partner using sex as a weapon? Why is that
Mhm.
blame and shame the thing that's being bounced around? Because there's an
Mhm.
mhm.
alternative to what we
Yeah.
bounce between us.
And I
Yeah.
think of it in
There's an
2
yeah.
ways, right? I think of the map as having almost 2. I think of it like, do you remember this? I'm gonna age myself right now, but did any of your teachers ever use those, transparencies on overhead projectors?
Totally. I
Yes.
love them.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you ever smell the marker? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
No.
totally, totally. Yes.
Pleasure.
So, pleasure. So see, that kind of pleasure is fine. Drug pleasure is totally fine. I don't have a reaction to that. Okay, so
I have a reaction to
now
that.
you
No,
had
no,
it. You had
no,
a big
no, no,
like,
no.
no. All your muscles went, no. Right. So I imagine us building, as you're thinking through, you're building like a multi-layered map. So you can make one
Mm,
like
mhm. I'm
Mhm.
picturing the
transparency
first
and then
yes.
lay another transparency on top of it and project both of them. And
Yeah.
you could even lay a third or fourth
Mm,
or fifth or whatever.
that's a
So
I'm
really
like
good
playing
was
the
just
metaphor.
drums,
That's
thinking,
such
laying
a
those transparencies on top of each other right
exactly,
now.
exactly. So I'm thinking about it though for maybe a listener who's never even explored this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The first transparency, I just wonder about, what do you know? What do you carry from your family? What do you carry from different experiences? Too many people have been through sexual trauma.
Mhm.
So you may be carrying some really hard stuff with that. What do you carry from the culture?
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of talk now about women and what maybe the culture's telling us. I'm thinking even Ted Lasso on the recent series had a whole thing about this, had a whole episode about over sexualizing women and then shaming them for having sexual desire.
Totally. That was such a fun episode.
It was such a good
I'm
episode.
behind. I don't care. I'm just
And
behind.
let's not forget. Totally.
So I can't join in on that.
Let's not forget, though, that men are getting all these messages too.
Totally.
It's and
And it's really hard to talk about what we don't know.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Right?
So that would all go in like, what do I already know? Like, what's my
Yeah.
psychological floor already holding about sex? And then you can start layering on another transparency about maybe desire
Yeah.
or pleasure. And by the way, it might be changing. What you liked when you were 20 may not be what you like when you're 50.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
It's not like it might be changing. There's actually a lot of research that suggests this to be true. And there's a wonderful book called Magnificent Sex that talks about folks, like older couples who have discovered something that they really find pleasurable about sex. Typically, that the thing that it tends to point back to is that they're more comfortable talking about it.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And
Okay.
that probably, I don't know if you all know Emily Nagoski's work, but she's a sex educator who I really, really love. She wrote a book called Come As You Are. We can link that in the show notes as well.
She has a podcast too.
She does. She has a great
Same name.
podcast. She's so good. And she talks a lot about the research that's out there that talks about the sexual pleasure and when people are actually reporting their greatest sexual experiences and their most sexual satisfaction, guess what age it is?
Oh, like 50?
55 and up.
Yep.
Yay.
Yeah.
So it's not like I missed
the best years are coming. The best years are coming.
It's coming. But it comes because you get to know yourself.
Yeah.
You get to know yourself and you're not as scared about being more vulnerable or more open, or just saying, I'm about to drop a cuss word. Saying, fuck it. Like, what happens?
Totally.
Like, what bad thing is going to happen if I tell you this? I mean, come on. And so there's a lot of that energy, I think, is part of it. But you know what I was thinking about is if you and your partner, or maybe even just you and your own exploration, want a super beginning kind of way to start talking about this stuff, here's what you could do. Make a yes, no, maybe list.
I love the yes, no, maybe list. My favorite thing about it is that you start with the yeses.
Well, you know what I do with my couples? Here's something interesting is I have them. I don't know if either of you guys ever do this, but I have them co-create a massive list.
Oh, yes.
Right. Of
just
all
add
the different
everything.
things
All
they
the
can think
things.
of. So they brainstorm for like 10 to 20 minutes. Just write down any sexual thing that even feels vaguely sexual. And it may be wild stuff that you would never even want to do. That doesn't matter. Just if you can think of it, write it on the list. If you can think of it, write it on the list. And then you make a copy of whatever that list is. And you both take it away and write down which one of those things would be in your yes, absolutely column. And which ones would be in your no way. And which ones would be in maybe.
So you don't do the yes, no, maybes together.
And then
you co-create the list together.
The list together.
Co-create the list together.
But the labels on it, you do separately.
You do the separate.
You do those separately.
Because you have to compare.
Well, yeah. And I was just thinking, then there's no like, I don't want to use the word coercion, but then I'm not sitting there and
pressure.
I have something. Yeah. Even if it's really, really subtle. But so I'm totally on my own when I'm doing my yeses and nos and all that. Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of my people have a hard time like getting started with when they start to select yes, no, maybes. And so sometimes like I keep it simple. Like I'll give them highlighters or different colored pens or something. And I'll tell them like to start with like the yeses or start with, right? Like start with one thing and just like go through and like, what would be that? Like just mark that.
And I tell them if it's a yes, it's like an absolutely, that's great.
Yeah, it brings some joy, some excitement.
Yeah.
Some, like,
Right.
it's like,
An enthusiastic yes.
Yeah,
yeah. Otherwise, it's not a yes, it's a maybe.
It's a maybe. I was just
Right.
going to say that.
Right.
Like, if
There
I'm
are-
like,
There are
I'm
also
good.
some that are
That's-
like, oh no, like do not touch the back of my elbow.
just
It's
gonna say
weird.
Jill's
I don't
elbow.
like it. There's nothing about it that I find enjoyable. It's just creepy. So I'm just noticing, that there's I'm just kind of scanning my body. If I get an oh hell no,
Mhm.
that absolutely goes on the no list, right?
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
there's the ones in between, and all those end up on your maybe.
Totally.
Mhm.
And then you can share your list with each other. It's a great way to start conversations. It's a great way to get to know each other. It's a great way to get to know yourself.
Mhm.
So there you go, a way to begin to explore.
It's such a, and you can even like share the list slow.
Mhm.
Right? Like, here's
Yeah.
one thing I want to share with you on my list today.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
that's
doesn't have to
slow.
be that you have
That
to.
is slow.
You don't mean
Yeah.
that I shouldn't sit down with him and whip through it in 20
No,
seconds.
and you don't have to just like compare lists. You can like literally, like, you can
Yeah.
hold this close and go through it slowly.
Mhm.
You can pace this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't
Right?
have to be an absolute comparison of everything that's on your
Mhm.
list all at once. Yeah.
Yeah. This has turned into a long one.
Yeah,
I love it though.
has.
It's nice to
Good
be
stuff.
back with season 5.
What?
Wow.
Can you believe
Wow.
it?
Oh, it's good to have you back,
Yes and no.
everyone.
Yeah.
Take care, y'all.
Bye-bye.
That wraps up this week's episode. Join us again next week for another Why Does My Partner?
We hope that you continue to listen wherever you get your audio and that you'll follow the show.
To go deeper, join us at one of our workshops. You'll find our next date at whydoesmypartner.com.
Did you know you can ask us your questions?
Your questions are relational gold.
Go to whydoesmypartner.com to either write in or record your question for a future episode.
And here are some gratitudes. Thanks to Al Huberman, our sound editor and podcast production magic maker.
Thanks to every one of you who has joined us for our workshops in the past. We've learned so much from all of you.
And thanks to everyone who's reviewed the show on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help others to find the show.
Take care of each other best you can.
See you next time.